We have our first is framing, protest structural violence. First, guns are manufactured to distract from structural violence. Lead 22 finds governments have a long history of collecting data from civilians, justifying the loss of privacy in the name of security. Jackson 12 confirms big threats are designed to distract from structural violence. Rulers hope you won't notice structural violence if you think they're greater threats to your safety. You've been conned. Second, the traditional risk calculus is racist and fails to address structural violence. Richard 96 writes, policymakers should look to society's most vulnerable. Fear of catastrophes leads policymakers to battle dramatic but statistically less threatening hazards while accepting more harmful but more mundane hazards. Indeed, Nixon 11 finds that we need to engage violence that is not spectacular. The relative invisibility of structural violence means it is underrepresented in strategic planning as well as in human memory. Contention 1 is law enforcement. Hindu 21 explains undergirding the rise of mass incarceration in America, there's surveillance of racialized individuals. Law enforcement has mobilized new technologies for police operations to monitor and contain people of color. Police adopted proactive policing, acquiring technologies for proactive rather than reactive policing with the turn of the 21st century. Law enforcement is a tool of control. Hinted further, mass incarceration had functioned as a new racial caste system fueled by calculated disenfranchisement, destruction, and death. Since the inception of police, law enforcement have characterized colored persons as internal enemies and threats to state authority and established social orders. Thus, biometric technology functions to increase police power, rendering it more efficient and effective at its true goal, oppression. ACLU 20 finds that adding technology to a racist legal system renders it a more efficient tool of oppression. Face recognition technology is biased, misidentifying black and Asian people 100 times more often than white people who are then misidentified, arrested, and charged for crimes they didn't commit. And Lead 22 concludes surveillance technologies enable more precise discrimination as law enforcement impacts marginalized populations. Facial recognition technologies have drastically enlarged the precision and scope of potential surveillance with access to massive amounts of data. The result is devastation. DPA 15 finds that consequences of mass incarceration are denying child custody, voting rights, employment, loans, licensing, student aid, public housing, and deportation, creating a permanent second-class status for millions of Americans. Contention 2 is state control. Subpoint A is black activism. Despite the emergence of many social justice movements in the US, they've begun to fail. White 22 finds that our protests are failing, with Black Lives Matter never achieving their avowed objectives today. Activist protests are ineffective and do not result in social change. Biometrics are fueling their downfall. Hornsey 23 finds police use surveillance to track leaders of peaceful protests, waiting for them to engage in any conduct that could provide a pretext to arrest them, such as standing off the sidewalk onto a roadway. Facial recognition technology allows law enforcement to compare recorded images of protesters to identify specific demonstrators. The prospect of having oneself identified for simply attending a demonstration deters participation. John 23 quantifies 6 separate federal agencies and police departments across the country use facial recognition thousands of times to identify and arrest protesters. Overall, Banner 19 finds this results in a chilling impact on public protest, assembly, and speech. The impact is progressive movements. Ray 22 finds Black Lives Matter has shed light on police brutality, shifted public opinion, and ushered in a series of policy changes that include implicit bias training, body-worn cameras, and bans on no-knock warrants. These reforms are critical. IHME 21 finds the total number of deaths from police violence from 1980 to 2019 was 32,000. Black Americans experienced fatal police violence at a rate 3.5 times higher than white Americans, which Rosino 18 concludes legitimizes and reproduces an unequal racialized social order. Subpoint B is gender securitization. Gender surveillance is rising and biometrics are to blame. HUD22 confirms algorithmic gender recognition assesses an individual by identifying bodily landmarks and contours. Algorithmic gender recognition corporate use exists under tailored advertisements and gendered apps. And furthers that travel and migration have become overwhelmingly managed through gender-encoded biometric data used by facial recognition systems. Overall, biometrics are being used in countless smaller instances that seem benign but collectively reproduce a particular view of gender into our socio-technical fabric. Biometrics definitionally deny self-identification. Curl 11 explains the assumption that the classification of male or female as a permanent feature of the body underlies the rationale for use and identity verification. HUD22 corroborates biometrics are predicated on bodies and identities being static because algorithms are encoded with binary gender. Thus, these systems force conformity or erasure. Conrad 09 confirms the transgender body appears contradictory. Data history comprises 2 bodies, male and female, rather than one genderqueer body. Rather than abandoning the gender system, predictive tech can only reinforce it. The body's pressure to conform or be excluded. Further, biometrics enable targeting of queer people. HUD22 further, gender recognition tools be used in ways beyond early development, given intensified focus on women-only spaces, bathroom bills, and U.S. discriminatory laws. HR can alert when the wrong gender enters spaces. The impact is the erasure of the transgender community. The Lampkin Institute 22 concludes anti-trans hostility in the U.S. seeks the complete eradication of trans identity, calling for policies that criminalize trans lives. All attempt to further marginalize transgender identities contributes directly to high levels of societal violence as well as mental and physical health challenges, thrusting them outside the community of moral obligation if they fail to conform to these norms. That's where you're from. Okay, second.
At the top, they don't read the board, but I have to respond in second. Constructive will deal with it in a rebuttal code case. Contention with cartels. U.S.-Mexico tensions are really high. With Gold 23, Lopez review calls from the U.S. lawmakers and Bernal 23. A future administration could go beyond threats. Moreover, CPA 23, the number of homicides in Mexico rose 15% a record high. Mineo 22, the epidemic of violence driven by weapons from the U.S. 90% of guns can be traced back. Smart guns solve Edmund 22. Fitted with biometrics, they require a fingerprint from the owner to trigger to release, eliminating the possibility of a gun use in crimes. Teal 22. With the firearms industry is ripe for innovation, the industry will find public interest. Hopkins 16. Most Americans support smart guns. Those 23. Bidens believe 100% of firearms sold in the U.S. should be smart. Otherwise, relations break your error. 22. Mexico is demanding that the gun makers adopt new smart gun tax. CFR. The cartel fuel rampant violence in Mexico. Tens of thousands of homicides. Haddock 10. An increasingly chaotic border making bloody cartels would cause many questions. The importance of military ventures elsewhere opportunistic adversaries would no doubt adjust. Meth 13. Tehran would become aggressive, propelling the spread of nuclear weapons, pressure on Israel leading to a preemptive strike. North Korea and China become aggressive and proactive, catastrophic conflicts. Contention 2 is terrorism. Jacobson 22 finds that biometrics like Palantir have been used by the CIA to identify insurgent threats to allow a targeted response. For example, Jacobson 22, U.S. soldiers in Afghanistan collected iris patterns to accurately identify enemy combat systems of accurate. Alan 20, biometrics is a scientific discipline they provided for a single useful tech for accurate identification. Accuracy matters. Alon finds that it is indiscriminate U.S. military intervention is a major cause of terrorism and will cause more additional terrorist attacks than they prevent. Domestic terrorism too. Jacobson 22, Homeland Security holds biometric information on 200 million people. It results are empirically verified. Red Cross 22, the DoD uses biometrics to capture 1,700 individuals who would otherwise represent a threat to U.S. security. Gorman 11, if we had biometrics, we could have stopped 9/11 on a whole GTI 23. Terrorism fell 38%. A single attack would cause extinction. Clark 21. After COVID, extremists will pursue biological weapons. Sears 20 writes bioengineered pathogens are both communicable and lethal and existential threat to human civilization. Contention 3, CBDC. The CBDC race is underway. Red 22 with CBDC trials launched. China is aiming to replace cash with digital yuan. White House 22, the president encouraged the Fed to continue CBDC research. Luckily, Elisha 21, the U.S. continues to lead in the innovation and implementation of blockchain. And Gaussami 23, Bitcoin has now recovered all of its losses since FTX collapsed. Biometrics are the reason. IDEX with the biometric sensing technology can be transferred from wallet to the establishment with no lengthy process. Rolf 20, until there is a seamless way to exchange digital money for goods and services, there is likely to be limited interest or ways to take up the currency for the public. A biometric payment card can solve. Because digital currencies are accessible to the unbanked, Fonda 21, the U.S. needs a digital dollar to counter China's threat from digital currencies, which would displace the dollar. Transition is devastating. Kowalski 17, the U.S. is the reserve currency. When value drops, it costs more to buy commodities. The dollar is the pricing mechanism for global trade. Food shortages cause violent conflict. Jones 17, there's a long history of food insecurity directly producing violent protest. Shortages decrease food availability. Individuals participating in violent riots. Worse, FEI 12, conflicts will most likely be fought over resources. If people are hungry, the state isn't stable. Bloody wars follow. UK Ministry of Defense, CIA, CSIS, and also all identify famine as a trigger for nuclear war. Contention 4 is China. Beckley 22 finds that China has sold tools of tyranny. Biometrics pioneered a system that allows dictatorship to watch citizens constantly instead and instantly selling to 80 countries. The only risk of stopping China is beating them at their own game. James 19, new tech promises to transform geopolitics. Throughout history, progress has been built on tech. The United States has been the world's most innovative country, but it is at risk of losing that title to China. If China led the new tech race, Beijing may rewrite international rules. Luckily, due to deteriorating demographic and structural economic decline, Ericsson 21, China's power is peaking, creating a decade of danger from a system that realizes it has short time to fulfill its goals. As Xi internalizes these challenges, he has become more accepting of risk. Fortunately, Ericsson 21, the U.S. retains formidable advantages. Due to its extreme value, BI-21 bans in some countries will not affect deployment in others. A ban in the U.S. would allow other countries to develop FRN-22 to ensure biometric tags are imbued with U.S. values and must promote their development in America where regulations are influenced by U.S. legislation. U.S. companies commit privacy is a key advantage. Biometrics are being implemented into every part of tech, laws, AI, computing. FRN-22 furthers America's competitiveness will quickly wither if the U.S. limits biometric data, stifle innovation, negatively impact economic growth, and prevent U.S. from providing leadership. Due to clinging and challenging Tech 14 finds that the rise of new global powers necessitate great power conflicts. Dow 15, the next great power would involve nuclear weapons, fighting miscalc, and Star 15 concludes a nuclear war will create an environment too cold and too dark to would vanish forever.
We're gonna pick up. Just stand here. Are you free to right? I'm just going to go. Okay. My first question, since I spoke first. Alright. How many firearms are in the US?
A lot.
72 million, right? Okay. So, like, if I'm a cartel, actually I'm not gonna say that. If they're cartels and they want to bring weapons like into Mexico, how does having like all the new guns be smart guns remove the 72 million like other firearms that they could bring into Mexico?
Right. So the idea is that with biometrics, like the argument is that the gun industry is ripe for innovation right now, and it's a push really hard right now to get from the government to get biometric guns to be the like 100% of guns in the U.S. Like the push right now is to get biometrics to completely dominate the industry right now.
How does having all the new guns produced being biometric guns get rid of existing firearms?
Okay, so the argument is that like it'll be harder for cartels in Mexico to like smuggle like the guns. Like if there are more guns like biometric guns in the U.S., it'll just be harder for them to smuggle like those.
Why would they just smuggle the millions of not biometric guns?
Because they would be harder to smuggle like the old guns if there's like laws and protections on the old guns, because like if they're prohibited now because biometric guns are taking over like the gun industry.
You don't read anything about creating regulations as to their everyone having to destroy non-smart guns.
If biometric guns take over the tech industry, it'll be much harder to get illegal guns for the same reason that if the new Pokemon set came out, it'll be much harder to get the old one.
Okay.
Let's go to like the progressive movement stuff.
Sure.
So like how how much has biometrics been key to like increasing the mass incarceration, like the gender movement stuff, like specifically biometrics?
Wait, you just asked a question that referred to a part of each of our arguments. What is this about?
So it's kind of overall, but like we can talk about mass incarceration if you want. How much has biometrics specifically like led to the increase of mass incarceration?
I mean, like, I don't know what kind of quantifier you want me to give you. Our hinted evidence says, actually no, our lead-in evidence says it massively increases the size and scope and precision of like police biometrics.
Like, so how much of the mass incarceration that's happened in the last like 5 years has been due to biometrics specifically?
I would say a lot. Our hinted evidence says that the process that is undergirding how mass incarceration is taking place is the use of technology. For example, like surveillance. Can I get a question? All right, so on your argument about CBDCs, what your role evidence says is that CBDCs can't take place unless there's a seamless way to exchange digital currency for goods. Have you like ever used like Apple Pay?
Biometric cards solve.
Wait, why do they solve in a way that's different than like Apple Pay?
Because the biometrics that are going to be implemented are specific to the central bank digital currency, whereas Apple Pay is not.
Wait, so why do they need biometrics? Why can't like the digital currency be used in the same way, like NFC transfers, the way that Apple Pay is used? Like, what about biometrics solves this problem?
Well, so the argument is that biometrics are going to be implemented into the CBDCs, and there's only a way that like the CBDCs can be like used for the transition between like wallet and like the electronics. Like,
cool. So what happens if you ban them and it's some other kind that's not biometrics?
Huh.
No, let's go. Everyone good?
It's just an order of mentions.
Yeah. Nothing weird.
Just looking for.
Okay.
On their C1 about guns, first, they can just not use smart guns. There are already millions of those in Mexico. The weapons that are used by these cartels are explicitly the illegal ones. They're not going to use the smartest guns because they don't want to be tracked. Second, none of their evidence says that smart guns are actually being implemented, just that Biden supports them. They need to win that they're being used now or there is no link. Third, the internal link is non-existent. We have no idea how cartels causing Israeli first strike, and their Mets evidence is empirically false because we have never seen it happen in the past, despite the uniqueness. On C2. First, this is exactly what our framing is talking about. Our Jackson evidence specifically says that the surveillance media talking about the threats posed by terrorism, X-ray machines in every building, surveillance cameras everywhere, drones in Afghanistan. This display is meant to convince you that these threats are serious, hoping you won't notice increasing inequality, hoping you won't notice how much structural violence there is, hoping you won't notice trillions of dollars spent on foreign wars and security theater, talking about the need to expand counterterrorism. They have been conned. Second, biometrics fail to stop terror attacks. First, they are easy to fake and don't detect sleeper cells. Mars 11 finds that biometric identifiers can easily be faked. Terrorists obtain genuine passports by using falsified personal identity and fraudulent supporting documents. Second, they are inaccurate. Libby 21 finds that the face recognition technology to identify people wearing masks only had an accuracy of 39%. But third, turn it. False alarms create more panic. Adams 11 finds that policies allowing for easy surveillance of people who have little reason to be suspected of terrorism have generated thousands of false leads that distract from real threats. Fourth, turn it. Biometrics cause data overload and inefficiencies in counter-terror efforts. Gibbons 21 explains that the NSA collects biometric data, and Zach 16 finds that the NSA's data overload has led to more terrorist attacks succeedingly, turning their case and leading to more terror. Fifth, turn it. Walt 14 finds that if the United States did not have vast surveillance powers, they'd rely on infiltrating extremist organizations and flipping existing members. Houston 17 finds that these methods have over 3.5 times higher chances of stopping terror attacks than mass surveillance programs. Then 6, no impact bioterror. 8, terrorists won't use it. Lenso 17 finds that terrorists tend to be conservative and use readily available weapons, not unconventional weapons that are difficult to develop. Few have even contemplated using biological agents. B, it's functionally impossible. Lenso furthers that agents are difficult to use and skills are demanding. Indeed, Blum 20 finds that none of the most dangerous agents can be easily weaponized. Pathogenic viruses are extremely hard to find, isolate, and spread. Thus, Morrow 17 finds that it is beyond the abilities of a terrorist cell. C, countermeasures solved. Lensos 14 finds that medical countermeasures such as antibodies and vaccination blunt the impact of an attack. Thus, Lensos concludes that all historical attempts were small-scale, low-casualty events. But D, weigh all of these responses on probability. Blum 20 concludes that there is a long history of terrorists being fascinated by bioweapons. It is one of failures. The challenges associated with weaponizing biological agents have proven insurmountable. On C3. First, they concede and cross that there are other ways of paying for things, which is what their link is about. Apple Pay, etc. It's conceded, which means that they don't access their impact because they're not proving that biometrics are a unique link. But second, we would say overall that obviously they're going to continue to use cryptocurrency regardless of biometrics if they can use any other form of this authentication. And then third, we would say that biometrics reduce privacy, which reduces the incentive for people to use cryptocurrency, reducing the cryptocurrency that they talk about. On C4. First, U.S. hegemony is unsustainable. Marchetti 17 writes that the costs of managing the system have become accumulating in the last 4 presidencies. We finally come to a point in which the costs become too heavy for citizens, so they demand international withdrawal. Monkey team confirms that American decline is inevitable. Voters are worn out by the burden of expensive wars and have given up on the American empire. That's where you turn it. Absent competition, multipolarity will be peaceful. However, pursuing competition will guarantee conflict. Marchetti 17 writes that China closing a gap with the West would de-escalate tensions. Without a hegemonic power, a balance might emerge. Indeed, Fusion 17 finds that the U.S. must decide how it will react to decline, whether to acquiesce to new leadership or seek to punish the challengers and risk a new hegemonic economic war, which their evidence concludes causes extinction. Third, multipolarity is guaranteed to be peaceful. TIMS 21 finds that China and the US are resistant to war. The nuclear deterrent mediating bodies such as the UN and superpowers' aversion to conflict serve to advance peace. But fourth, we'll skip the Weiss evidence. Then turn it, absent competition, China's rise will be peaceful. Zotang 19 of Foreign Affairs finds that China's ambitions are narrow. China's foreign policy will focus on economic growth. Both sides will manage tensions. At the top of Beijing's priorities is a liberal order. Beijing and Washington will largely carry out their competition in the economic realm. But then turn it, attempting to counter China emboldens hardline policies, ensuring a hostile rise as Banner 21 finds a frontal assault on CCP legitimacy, risks convincing Chinese leadership faces an existential threat, ensuring a hostile response. Or such tactics aid nationalism. As a result, such action increases the risk of conflict, mistrust, and miscalculation. Then we say there's no impact. Banner 21 finds that China does not pose an existential danger because they have excessive debt, inefficient state enterprises, and discriminatory economic policies, so you can't vote on them.
Got it.
Cool.
Word.
Everyone's good? Sounds good. Alright. If everybody is ready, let's have time starts on cartel. Oh wait, sorry, I didn't give an off time right now. That's my bad. It's our case, then their framing, then their case. My bad. Alright. Time starts now. On cartels, they really mess up. The first thing, they just can't use smart guns. But our evidence indicates that 90% of the arms come from the United States, so we're stopping the majority of cartel violence, and they indicate that Biden is implementing smart guns right now. The second thing they say is that we aren't doing it right now, but our evidence indicates that they are doing it right now. Gimbal 23, secured by fingerprint and 3D infrared facial recognition, BioFire Technologies announced a 9mm handgun in a news release on April 15th. Plus, they can see that Biden has intention to make 100% smart guns usage, and they can see that Mexico also wants smart guns. The third thing they say is the internal link is non-existent. I can re-explain it. The Haddock the case that if cartel violence continues to rise, then they're just going to have to military intervene, which forces them to disengage from other regions, which causes an Israeli strike because they see Iran as an existential threat. They also just don't need defense to this, so just because they say no war and we have a war, you still vote on it. Also, they conceded, they say didn't have a war, they concede cartel violence is at an all-time high. On C2, on terrorism, we'll concede that bioterror never happened, which kicks out of all the turns except for the turn about diverting from other big threats, but on diverting from other big threats, they don't outline what these other threats are. On the link on structural violence, I'll get to that in their case. On CBDCs, they also really mess up here. The first thing they say is that we can use Alphabet. They conceded ours, in which case the biometrics are uniquely good because they reduce things like fraud and other things like that, and they're more convenient than the alternative. The second thing they say is that people will use crypto anyway, but they haven't read evidence why people use crypto anyway. We'd say that biometrics uniquely secure the market because crypto is so volatile and they want a form of security. The third thing they say is that if we reduce privacy, there's less users. There's no evidence as to why privacy decreases usage. We say security matters more because people care more about their money than their privacy. On the China hedge war stuff, we'll concede their last response that China is like too weak to attack anyway because they have declining power. The only turns, also line out on the turns. First they say that multipolarity is peaceful, but we'll concede that China doesn't have the funds to attack in the first place. And it means that even if US hedge declines or US hedge increases, it doesn't matter because there's no conflict in the first place. On their second turn the third thing is the same thing. On the fourth thing about how it hasn't produced global stability, we would argue that overall we still haven't seen the existential risk manifest because US hedge has still been at an all-time high and we haven't seen any of these arguments happen. And we've also conceded that China doesn't have the fees to attack. That should be good. Alright, let's go to their cases. At the top on framing, first, if we prove our big threats, we do new errors on specificity because they should label all threats as big wars. We outline unique big threats. Second, conflict prereqs. It's reverse called the Goldstein 01. Causality runs at least as much strongly the other way. War has fueled and sustained those injustices. If you want peace, work for peace. Causality doesn't just run upward from society, it runs downward, changes in attitude toward military, maybe the most important ways to reverse oppression. Cut the next pause. Then a few reasons for extinction. First, political activism. Portal 17. The possibility of murder scarred by nuclear desolation suggests vulnerability. Shared peril becomes an opportunity to build new alliances and contest away the thing endemic to establishment. Nuclear leadership as readers to conceive of nuclear wars and attack on the planet. All people challenging people looking on trade boundaries around the globe, dividing one human society from another. This is the worst form of structural violence. Extinction prevents any future generations from experiencing life or accumulating value in any degree. Also, cartels probably like something because they cause a lot of violence against marginalized groups. On law enforcement, first it's down most holistic stats, Biometrics 21. The incarceration rate fell to its lowest level since 1995. The rate peaked between 06 and 08. It's declined steadily since. Changes in criminal law also play a role. Second, structural change solved. Humphreys 21, mass incarceration might end as the white rate of jail suppressed Hispanics for that for the first time and became 50% of the jail population. Increasing shares of white people among inmates gives opponents of incarceration chance to expand the reach across the red scar. Third, COVID solved. Consider 20. Jails and prisons become centers of the coronavirus. This intensifies decarceration to reduce the number of people under control, permanently reducing the number of people behind bars. Fourth, cut the next response. The bias is gone. Rate 22. According to the most recent evaluation, each of the top 150 algorithms were 99% accurate across demographics. White people is the lowest performing. On state control, on activism. First, movement remains strong. The Dallas 2022, 2/3 of Americans supported BLM during protests in 2020. While that number declined in the summer, it's remained stable since September. 55% expressed support. Second, they aren't using biometrics for arrest plus backlash solves. Fowler 20, BLM is forcing a reckoning on police use of facial recognition forever. IBM and Amazon and Microsoft said they won't sell FRC unless there are federal laws on matter. Customer squad. Third, protest turned against police. Hill 20, activists turned facial recognition against the police. Public is concerned about a blanket ban facial recognition and use on officers. They are not identifying themselves with public accountability is important. We need to unmask law enforcement in case of misconduct. On gender securitization, 1. Traditional ID is worse. Short sample 20. For paper ID, transgender people go by legal name. That doesn't match gender by conscious. Records remain the same as DNA fingerprints. Outweighs extending and psychological on and actually affects trans people. Cut the rest of that stuff. Second, inclusive design solved Haynes to 21. Trans technology address challenges with digital identity systems to train face ID to recognize modified identities and help users pass as the gender they identify. Statistically proved. Mechanic 14 is data set of over 1.2 million face individuals constructed from videos undergoing gender transformation. The approach is outperformed 76%. I think.
So, on your first contention, if you conceded that cartels can just use not smart guns, which was the first response, how do you win offense?
Because the most of the guns they get are from the United States. The United States, like 90% of the guns they get are from the United States. The United States is going to make 100% of smart guns, 100% of guns smart. So.
Wait, yeah, but our argument is about existing guns. That's what the response explicitly
it's
says.
only 10% of their stockpile.
90%. Yeah,
from the US.
90% come from the U.S. And those U.S. ones are not smart guns. My response is, if that's the case, why can't they just use these not smart guns, especially when they're already buying them illegally?
Because you can see that Mexico also wants to ban the collection of legal guns as well, which was
Wait,
also frontline enemy.
Wait, that's not even like a part of your argument.
No, it is. Guerrero 21.
And also,
Mexico is banning the
wait,
makers of authorized smart guns.
that also doesn't interact. Our argument is that there are already not smart weapons. They're not going to take in every single gun and make it smart. If there are millions and millions of guns in Mexico, making smart guns in the United States won't stop it.
If the guns they're getting are from the U.S. and the U.S. makes them smart, then they're not going to be able to get the old smart guns, and Mexico's probably going to independently just like
they don't
crack
need a
down
steady
on
stream of
right?
guns.
No,
They just need
So I think what's more important is the
one
Guerrero.
set of guns. You can have a
I think the more important thing is the Guerrero reference that Mexico literally does not want does not want not smart guns, which means they probably independently just stop the entrance of those U.S. guns.
So your argument is that Mexico will take away every single gun that's in
They
the
take
hands
away a
of
significant
cartels.
majority.
Your
And it
argument
wasn't-
is that the
it was
Mexican
succeeded.
government is going to take away the significant
They-
majority
they-
of guns in the hands of cartels.
Okay.
I'd say, considering that your own
They-
argument is about corruption in the government, that's not going to happen. You can have a
They lose a large majority of their stockpile. Like new weapons happen all the time, right? Like
You can have a
obviously- okay, sure. True. Mexico already banned existing guns too. Okay. Let's talk about your argument on activism. Are protests working right now?
Our argument is that they're not working, and that the best place to look in order to determine whether they're working is the results, right? It does not matter how many people support the movements necessarily. Our evidence says not that many people support it, but that's not what's important. What our white evidence identifies in 2022 is that although these movements have happened, they have not achieved their goals, which means that they have ultimately been failures, and the reason for that is biometrics, which is our argument.
Okay.
Can I have a
So
question?
why can't the police or law enforcement use other forms of surveillance? Why is biometrics
Yeah,
worse?
our lead evidence is very, very good on that question. It says that biometric surveillance has dramatically increased the scope and regularity of their surveillance with access to massive amounts of data. Can I have a
Why
question?
can't they get mass amounts
This
of
is-
data from-
You've taken 3, can I have one? Let's talk about central banking digital currencies.
Let's do that.
So, can you explain to me why banning biometric recognition technology would prevent us from using central banking digital currencies?
Because we lose the seamless form of transportation by decreasing the security around it.
What's the seamless form of transportation?
The security stuff.
So your argument is that cryptocurrency becomes less secure, and then all the central banks are just like, we're not going to use cryptocurrency anymore.
Yep.
Okay.
Because our evidence pretty clearly indicates that's the primary reason for passive CBC, that we need secure data.
Okay. It'll just be framing our case, their case. Cool.
Is it framing your case, their case?
Yeah. Everyone good? Cool. On framing, we're going for the warrants from Virchik and Nixon. It's that 1. Traditional risk calculus is racist and its focus on catastrophes is that warrant are unable to address structural violence, and secondly, the policymakers already focus all of their attention to the biggest threat, so we need to reprioritize vulnerable populations. They have a few responses. The first is that the first is political activism means that people come together. Their evidence just says that imagining existential threats means that people come together. We don't actually have to solve for them. Second, group all of their util responses about I don't know, future generations being important. 1, future generations, don't exist. 2, our argument is not just a rejection of util. Our argument is essentially vulnerability way that, these vulnerable populations are being unprioritized and their massive catastrophes are already being prioritized. So it's not a rejection of util, just that we should focus on these vulnerable populations. At this point, this is pretty much conceded. But then,
We're going to go for our argument about policing. Senate, American prison populations have ballooned in the last few decades, and the hinted evidence finds that biometric technology is to blame, enabling proactive rather than reactive policing in order to control communities of colors. The ACLU finds that biometric technology enables these systems to become more efficient and effective at oppressing these communities, and Lee concludes that biometrics have dramatically enlarged the precision and scope of that surveillance with access to massive amounts of data. The DPA finds that mass incarceration has disenfranchised and devastated millions and created a permanent second-class status for millions of Americans. Group both of their responses about incarceration going down. This is just a national trend that is happening because of lesser sentences, and says nothing about biometrics or policing, whereas Johnson 20 finds that in cities where biometric facial recognition was implemented with police forces, racial disparities in arrests increased 51%. That is concrete empirical evidence for the racial disparities caused by facial recognition technology. Next, they say that COVID solves. There's no warrant for why COVID solves their incarceration in the long term. We'd say that they just let decrease incarceration at as a short-term response to decreasing the pandemic. Then they say the bias does not matter. Our argument is about giving these tools to police departments who will use them to essentially hunt down people of color. Them being more accurate just makes them more efficient. Then, on the hill turn on state control, there's absolutely no warrant to or no explanation for how activists will use it or what happens after they ID police officers. We'd say qualified immunity means it doesn't happen. On the the traditional ID turn on gender securitization, this is not a turn. FRT doesn't replace traditional paper IDs like driver's licenses. Go to their case. First on their argument about guns, they have conceded that there are millions of guns in the US that can be readily brought into Mexico, which means that the introduction of smart guns does absolutely nothing to decrease the pool. They say 90% of guns come from the US. Yeah, 90% of guns, i.e. 72 million guns that are readily available. That's terminal defense because it means there's absolutely no change in the amount of guns that can go into Mexico. Then they're arguing about CBDCs. They've conceded that literally the only link in their case that has to do with the adoption of CBDCs says that there needs to be readily available ways to transfer digital currency for and exchange them for real life goods. You can literally do that with Apple Pay and NFCs. This is completely not unique. There's no warrant at all in their entire case as to how biometrics are key to this. I still don't know what their link really is. And they've also conceded that the turn that because it decreases.
Let's go for C4.
I don't have time. Because
it's really quick. It's like 15 seconds.
well, I have no time. So.
Wait, where were you at?
Real quick.
So we have that class.
Have you using 148?
What?
Have you using 148?
148. Oh.
Is that including the 23 before?
Yeah.
No.
Oh, okay. 20. Oh, you mean for the case?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, how much did y'all use total?
So 148.
Is it like 211?
44. Yeah. Okay.
So 49 months.
What's the order?
It's gonna go the neg. It's gonna go the neg, the framing, weighing there, and then the app.
Okay, let's go.
On smart guns mean non-owners can't fire in Mexico. U.S. tensions are high. That's why both U.S. and Mexico governments are pushing hard for smart guns. The implementation begins now, but banning stops the development of smart guns taking over the gun industry. It would be massively slowing cartel violence to smuggle thousands of guns from the U.S. If it's banned, other countries like Iran, Israel, and North Korea would become more aggressive because they see the U.S. is occupied by Mexico borders, and a preemptive strike leads to new war, which leads to extinction. They give a couple responses. They say they can use existing smart guns. They conceded the uniqueness and Mexico link, which are not front lines and rebuttal. Mexico already confiscates most of the guns now, which they conceded in instance. They conceded that for the push with gun industry ripe for innovation, overwhelming smart guns will over time slow and stop the flow of normal guns into Mexico, which works way better because both governments are on board. The U.S. is their number one source of guns, and they've been continually escalating gun exports with newer technology, meaning that the supply side goes down, making it harder to obtain those guns, especially given the uniqueness that Mexico is starting to crack down because of smart guns. On the implementation, they conceded the evidence from rebuttal from 96 hours ago that says gimbal, secured by fingerprints and 3D infrared facial recognition biofire technologies, and that's a new 9mm handgun and news release on April 13. The implementation is starting, banning would stop it. First, on the weighing, they just concede, go to the framing. The future generation argument is really simple. Future generations are the most under-prioritized, meaning that under their framing, you vote at. They conceded the wars cause structural violence per the Goldstein evidence. Causality runs at least as strongly other way. War has fueled to unsustain those injustices. Okay, what this means is that this response turns their case because they've dropped from Arno's rebuttal is we need to combat existentialism to solve structural violence and not the other way around. If you vote for the act, you are trying to solve for structural violence without addressing existentialism, but what the Goldstein evidence is very clear in telling you, which was clean dropped in their first summary, is that you need to evaluate existentialism before to solve for structural violence and not the other way around. You can't go for structural violence first to solve for existentialism. You have to address existentialism first. This, yeah. Also, cartels hurts marginalized groups, and dollar collapse hurts. Cartels hurts marginalized groups. So like we link in anyway, but that doesn't matter. Go to their case. On policing, they've conceded mass incarceration is getting better. Humphreys 21 finds that mass incarceration might end as the wide rate of being jailed surpassed the Hispanics for the first time and being 50% of the jail population. The increasing share of voice among inmates gave opponents their incarceration a chance to expand their reach. That's like clean defense dropped on their case. They just say BRT still increases it, sure, but this is a significant mitigation. If we win, the other structures solve, then they aren't solving the root cause. To win the structural violence framing, you have to take down the structure, which they are not. They are just taking away the tool for the system per our evidence. Because they are not addressing the root cause of this structural violence, you have to address the existentialism, which is the Goldstein evidence that ends around is completely dropped. You have to evaluate the impact. You have to evaluate the impact of like a first strike causing a nuclear war because the countries in the Middle East see that U.S. is too busy with Mexico.
Okay. Okay.
You ready for cross?
Yeah.
Okay. So let's talk about this response to you go on framing, or go for on framing from Goldstein. Does it say the word existentialism in the evidence?
It just talks about like wars and
Wait, no, it doesn't talk about extinction. It talks about war.
We're
It
still
says,
winning
really
the
quickly,
war and you aren't.
I would like to clarify, your impact is saying war causes a lot of bad things, correct? Then
For the goals, yeah.
then you're going for an impact about like a nuclear strike in general. How do you access that weighing
Well, that and
if
also,
it doesn't actually apply to the scenario you go for?
plus cartels violence also links into conflict and war, and you can see that cartels also hurt marginalized groups a lot, which is also another link here.
Wait,
and
wait.
probably a better link because we're actually targeting the structure.
Hold on, then
We're
can I
here
have a
to say
quick
we're a
follow-up?
tool of the system.
Can I have a quick follow-up? So, if our argument is that we cannot prioritize catastrophes because they're always focused on, so we need to reprioritize those other threats, does it matter whether those catastrophes have negative effects?
Wait, can you say that again?
Yeah. If our argument is that we need to reprioritize the communities that are not being focused on, and we need to not look to catastrophes, does it matter whether the catastrophes that you talk about have a negative impact in general? Like, for example, on those
Because they also link
marginalized
to hurting
groups.
communities.
No, right? Because
But our framing operates at a higher level than that.
Because you say this war thing is conceded and it takes out yada yada. No, like the Nixon warrants and the Ritchie warrant, it's a vote that you've conceded, which is that these policymakers always focus on these threats, and thus we should focus on the more vulnerable populations because no one is solving for those. Also responds to this, right? Because then the war that you described is already being solved for.
The problem is that would be true in theory, but in practicality, like the defense of mod extents also takes us out because we say that literally mass incarceration, like incarceration reforms have been happening, which
Wait,
you
that's
also
a response on
concede
our case.
the front
Yeah,
line
I know.
that
We're
admits
talking,
that.
Ahmad still makes that implication.
the front line has conceded that that's a national trend, and that overall our evidence finds that biometrics have increased
for the second.
racial disparities 55%.
Wait, it doesn't matter, right? Both of them are about incarceration generally decreasing. Okay, let's talk about this evidence actually. Why does it say that
talking about both.
white populations in prison are now growing at a larger rate than like black populations?
What is it? What?
Why does it say that the percentage of black people in jail is decreasing?
I'm pretty sure that links a few trends like COVID, etc. That
No, it says that because all the sentences of the massive amount of people that we put into jail from the war on drugs are now getting out. That's why, right? It does not say that mass incarceration is ending, especially when you conceded evidence.
I'm reading the Humphreys evidence. It does not say that.
You conceded really fantastic comparative evidence that in cities where facial recognition technology has been implemented, racial disparities in arrests increased 51%. That's a lot of
The
percent.
implication we're going for this is a significant mitigation. Sure, it increased 51%, but if it goes from 100 to 150 because the amount of people in these instances is decreasing, then it's significant mitigation. You're not talking about the structure, which is how you do the structure.
The only piece of offense that they have extended in this round is on their argument about cartels, but they conceded our response that there are already 72 million non-smart guns that are being used in Mexico. They make a new response in summary, which was new in summary, that they confiscate most of the guns now. Number one, this response is new. But number two, if it's true, it's terminal defense on their case because they'll confiscate the guns anyway, so the argument that they're making about how it will escalate and cartels will take over the state never happens. It's a new response and it double binds them. They have no offense in this round. But let's go to where there is offense, which is on our framing. Extended. Our argument is that traditional risk calculus' focus on catastrophes means that we are unable to address structural violence. That's the Burchik and Nixon evidence. It says that policymakers should look to society's most vulnerable and that fears of catastrophes like they are going for lead policymakers to battle dramatic but statistically less threatening hazards while accepting more harmful but more mundane hazards. That's the Burchik evidence. We need to engage in underrepresented invisible violence and reprioritize it, which is the Nixon evidence. Both of their responses are Lincoln's, and they're both extended through Inc. They have conceded that our argument is not that we should just focus on impacts that affect these groups, but that we cannot focus on catastrophes because they are already being solved for. That's the Burchik evidence and the Nixon evidence. Even if the catastrophes that they talk about link into our argument, they have conceded that they are already being solved for, which means that you obviously prefer what is not being solved for, which is policing. So let's extend it. American prison populations have been ballooned in the last few decades, and the Hinton evidence finds that biometric technology is to blame, enabling proactive rather than reactive policing in order to control communities of color. The ACLU finds that biometric technology enables the system to become more efficient and effective at oppressing those communities, and Lee concludes that biometrics have dramatically enlarged the scope and precision of that surveillance with access to massive amounts of data, which the DPA finds have created a permanent second-class status for millions of Americans. Their only response on our argument is through Inc. It's that currently incarceration is going down, but they have conceded our argument, which is that that's just like a small national trend because people are getting out from war on drugs possessions. Our argument is that in places that had biometrics, racial disparities increased 55%, and mass incarceration is obviously still going on right now. That's what their evidence concludes.
Okay, alright. Step time. Sorry. Now, starting from they conceded that cartels attack marginalized groups in Mexico, which links into framing. They say this is a catastrophe, so it doesn't matter. Why is this a catastrophe? Why are they not? This is just far too unwarranted. It's not specific word. But if we win that this scenario is true, that we win a link there, it's about catastrophe in general. But if we win a specific link into Mexican cartels prioritizing like promoting marginalized violence, that still is a link into their argument. But even more importantly, they've conceded that future generations are the most underrepresented in policymaking because they literally don't have a say, which means under their own framing about like underrepresented voices, future generations are a reason to affirm. They've conceded that I'll extend the argument there, but they've conceded that if things happens, then future generations literally don't have a say, which is a more which is a higher level of structural violence than their argument because they literally don't have a say. With that being said, let's go to the smart guns argument. Let's extend it. Smart guns means non-orders can't fire and Mexico use tensions are high. That's why both US and Mexico governments are pushing hard for market. The implementation begins now, banning explosive development, with smart guns taking over the gun industry, with massively sold cartel bonds to smoke thousands of guns from the US. If it's banned, other countries like Iran, Israel, and North Korea become more aggressive because they see the US as occupied by Mexico more than a preemptive link to nuclear war constitution. They each send one response. They just say that they can use the guns anyway. They say that response about Mexico taking away is a new in summary. No, it's not. It was definitely a rebuttal. Even that they say it's a double bind because they say it's a double bind. No, they say that guns are smuggled illegally. The confiscation of old guns is the way that illegal guns flow into Mexico and they become fully smart. The double bind doesn't apply because the guns are smuggling illegally. So we need to affect the flow of guns in the US. This means that smart guns will inevitably increase in Mexico if you ban biometrics. That obviously doesn't happen. They've also conceded that cartels are importing US guns at an increasingly high rate, which obviously means that if we start using smart guns, then they obviously can't use as many normal guns in the future, which definitely decreases cartel violence. With that being said, let's go to their case. On their case, we're going to mishandle defense. The Humphreys evidence indicates that among other trends like COVID, etc., forcing mass reform to the mass incarceration system, the problem is improving. They just say it's not going to be the biometrics. That does not matter. Reimplicate this as terminal defense by saying that if reform solve it, A means that it's not under priority because clearly people are already taking action, but B means they are linking to their frame because they're not taking down the root structure. We say that they only treat biometrics as a tool of the problem, and we say that if you only ban a tool of the problem, you don't want to link into structural violence. To win structural violence, you have to take out the structure. If they want to take out the structure that causes structural violence, per the conceded evidence that reforms are already solving, then obviously they don't want to link to structural violence.
Great job, y'all.
Great.